So Reginald Scott, please keep doing what you're doing. It's valued.
Hello everyone, Reginald Scott here. Welcome to the video. Great to see you all again. Hope you're all doing really well today. Today I have a video for you all about grease. So this is going to be how grease applies to your home mechanic work on your bicycle. I'm going to go through all these different categories today and explain to you how to use grease, what kind of grease to use where, health and safety, you name it, it's going to be in this video. Very comprehensive. There will be timestamps below if you want to jump to a particular section, but all the sections of today's video hopefully will be very useful to you if you wish to do mechanic work on your bike at home. As always, folks, if you could do me a massive favor, please do like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with a friend, and of course, please do comment below. I always look forward to reading your comments. And today is not an unboxing video, but this is my unboxing video knife. I had it laser engraved, so every time I use it, I can emphasize subscribe. I have a laser engraver. If you would like some custom laser engraved stuff for your bicycle, I have top caps and things, and I have medical alert bracelets on my Buy Me a Coffee page, link below. If you'd like to support the channel and support me in the videos that I make here, please do go to the Buy Me a Coffee page and support me there. Thank you very much. Right, so today what I want you to do is actually think of grease like another tool in your arsenal of tools for when you're maintaining your bike. Okay, it's very, very important. We're going to look at PPE, or personal protective equipment. When you're handling grease, I always like to use some gloves. The gloves I use are these nitrile examination gloves. These are powder-free ones. Usually with the latex gloves you get, they come powdered. But yeah, powder-free nitrile gloves. These are the ones I've been using for absolutely years. Nitrile generally are very good at resisting chemicals. They're a little bit pricier than some other types of glove, but I think it's worth it for that chemical resistance. Me personally, I would always use gloves, and there's several reasons why. First reason is it just makes switching from one job to another job very quick, right? If you've got grease all over your gloved hand, if you need to switch to doing a clean job, all you need to do is pull the glove off and there you are. Whereas if you've got grease all over your fingers, you've got to go wash it. And if it's a waterproof grease, it's really hard to get off your hands. So from a practical perspective, not cross-contaminating different jobs with grease, it makes sense, right? Because if you've got grease on your fingers and you touch like a customer saddle or even your own saddle, and it's like a porous material, like some saddles come with kind of a suede surface or maybe even old aged leather, if you put grease on that, it will soak in and you'll get a grease stain. So yeah, it's good to wear gloves because it means easy cleanup afterwards. Second reason is I have no idea, I'm not a chemical scientist or a chemist, I have no idea what the chemical composition of these greases are on a molecular level. I don't know how dangerous or how carcinogenic some of these greases are, okay? And I would rather be safe than sorry in, say, 5 or 10 years' time when I get hand cancer because I was dipping my fingers in the grease every day. And the final reason is, if you do get grease on your hands and you're constantly washing your hands with soaps and things, what I find is it tends to dry my skin out. Then I get cracked skin, I get sores and all sorts of things on my fingers. I don't like that. So I would always recommend gloves. And when you're filling your grease applicators, there are various different types of grease applicator. When you're filling different grease applicators, I would always recommend some eyewear and keep your mouth closed as well, because sometimes grease can become pressurized. If you have like a grease gun, for example, you can get a lot of pressure in a grease gun, and if it explodes or the lid pops off it or something, grease is going to go everywhere and it can end up in your eyes and in your mouth. So keep your mouth closed and wear some glasses when you are doing jobs like that. I will be using all, mostly bike-specific greases today. They are fairly safe. But with regards to buying alternatives, because there's always somebody in the comments who says, oh, I notice you're using, Morgan Blue, whatever. Can I substitute that with Babylonian demagnetized yak butter? And of course, I have no idea what, Babylonian demagnetized yak butter is. Maybe it's fine, but I don't know. So there's always someone who asks me, can I use an alternative? I would say just read what the manufacturer says and be careful. In the past, I've used non-bike specific greases and they have actually caused damage to things. For example, they can stain. I had a very bright blue grease once I used that was like a waterproof grease from a different manufacturer, a non-bicycle related manufacturer. It was for I think it was like marine engines and things, and it stained everything yellow. Weirdly, even though it was blue, it stained things yellow. I categorize grease into 3 different categories. Okay, I have my special and or custom grease, I have my specific grease, and I have my general grease. Okay, so these are the 3 categories. Let me explain each one. So in the first category I mentioned was the special or custom grease. And there's lots of manufacturers out there making various different products, whether they be wheels or special cranksets or something, bottom brackets, things like that. And alongside those products, they make a set of greases for servicing those products. So, for example, this red stuff here is DT Swiss Special Grease. And this is specifically for servicing DT Swiss wheel hubs. Even more specifically than that, it is for applying to the teeth of the ratchet systems of those hubs. And that's pretty much all it's for. So if you have DT Swiss wheels, it's probably a good idea to locate and buy some of the special grease for servicing those wheels. Now, can you use other greases? That's entirely up to you. But of course, you would run the risk of voiding warranties and things if you don't use the specific greases. So if you don't have that specific wheel and you don't need that specific grease, you don't have to worry about these kind of things. But DT Swiss are not the only people that do this. Lots of manufacturers, like I say, do make their own grease for their own products. So be aware of that. If you're servicing something at home, just double check if there are recommended greases, like I say, for a particular product that you're planning to service. So there you are, special grease. You don't really need to worry about that one too much. Okay, the next kind of grease is specific greases, and these are greases I use for very specific jobs. The first one is this one. By the way, none of these greases are sponsored at all. These are all just stuff that I have used for many years. I'm very used to it. I like the performance I get from it, and I'm comfortable with it. So if you go out and buy these greases, I'm not getting any money for it, but I know that you're getting something that should work. You can use whatever you choose to use. Okay, that's entirely up to you. But as I say, these are not sponsored. Right, Aquaproof grease. It's Aquaproof paste, it says, but I consider it in the grease category because, let's face it, it looks like grease. This is basically just a waterproofing stuff. It's not used inside bearings or on spindles. You don't want it to use it on anything that rotates or spins as such. Because it would just slow your bearings down because it's so viscous and thick. This is used for very specific tasks. It's incredibly sticky and resilient and waterproof.
Oh, baby.
This is used for waterproofing. Essentially, if I've got something that needs to be kept clear of water, or I need to form a barrier, for example, headsets. So this is a headset bearing. Before you were to put this in the headset cup, I would put Aquaproof paste in the cup and I would smear Aquaproof paste on the bearing itself so that it had really good protection against the elements and against water. When you have to press something in, so for example this bottom bracket cup here, this is a dry area here where I'm going to press a bearing in. I would put a little bit of Aquaproof paste in here perhaps, and just before I press the bearing in so that it would go in smoothly, it wouldn't drag. And again, it provides a bit of a waterproof barrier. The inside of bottom bracket shells as well. Before I push in a bottom bracket, I would use a little bit of this Aquaproof in there. So it's like a barrier. It's sort of easing in stuff that I'm press fitting into frames. That's basically what I use it for. Some people use it for seat posts. You can use it on threads, but I don't. I prefer something else for threads, which I'll move on to now. This stuff is called copper ease, but it can also be called copper grease or copper slip. I've heard people refer to it as, I call it copper grease because that's essentially what it is. This is possibly my favorite grease of all. Oh man, I love the smell of this stuff. It's got I don't know, it's a yummy flavor. I just think it smells fantastic. It is toxic. Don't eat it.
It smells like orange, but don't eat it.
Copper grease, basically, it's a viscous grease full of tiny particles of copper. What is this for? Where you've got two metal surfaces touching each other and particularly in situations where you have fine threads or any kind of thread for that matter, this stuff is absolutely brilliant. Number one, it helps things slide together and screw together really easily. Be aware, by the way, torque settings for dry components and greased components are different. So if you have greased, for example, a bolt, do check on a torque setting converter online to double check what torque setting you should be using, because a dry bolt is going to click the torque wrench much sooner than a lubricated bolt. The lubricated bolt, you can over torque it because it won't click as early. So you can break bolts by greasing them and over torquing them. So just be aware of that. I have a bolt here that would go into the stem. This bolt, as you can see, is dry. And what I would do is apply a little bit of copper grease to the end of this bolt. You don't need much. In fact, you need very little, to be honest with you. It's great stuff. This stuff adheres really, really well. It's very resistant to high heat, which is important. And I'll explain why that's important in a moment. But that will go in there really smoothly. And it will just prevent that bolt from getting seized into this stem, because we have here a steel bolt and an aluminium stem. So those two things can corrode together. And also, very common as well, a lot of people complain about this, disc brake, brake pad bolt retention screw or bolt. That thing there, people round the head off that, especially on 105 all the time. Little bit of copper grease on the thread of that bolt and you'll never have a problem. That thing will come in and out. And that is why the high temperature resistance of this copper grease is important, because braking components, especially disc brake components, get very, very hot. And copper grease is highly heat resistant, so it won't mind at all if you get it really, really hot. When you're attaching the brake rotor, if you've got one that uses 6 screws, or even the one that uses the center lock nut, bit of copper grease on the threads, again, very high heat resistant, not going to come off. Excellent for removing those parts later. You will thank me later. And finally, things like through axles and quick releases. A little bit of copper grease, especially on through axles, not so much on quick releases, but we all remember those images, those videos of Anna Philippe with his front wheel completely stuck in his specialized tarmac frame on the way down a mountain somewhere in France during the Tour de France.
His brakes failed. Look at that. Locked up and crashed him. How dangerous is that? Remco's in hospital now because his disc brakes failed. And now, look at, they can't even get the thing off. It's gotten so overheated. It's like smoke's coming off the brakes.
A little bit of copper grease on those through axle threads, they will always come out. And another good thing about the copper grease is, unlike other stuff, like for example, Morgan Blue recommend Aquaproof for threads. I find that if I put Aquaproof on a thread and I screw it in, the threading pushes the Aquaproof off. And there's very little Aquaproof actually left on the threads. It all just gets squeezed out. Like I say, with a very gentle coating, a very small smear of the copper grease, it really binds to those threads. And you can take that through axle in and out of your bike hundreds of times, and the copper grease is not going to come off. And this is also very water resistant. It's very resistant to chemicals and cleaning, so that if you're washing your bike regularly and you're removing the wheels and you're taking the through axles out and the through axles are getting wet and or a little bit soapy, it doesn't wash the copper grease off very easily. Right, moving on to more general greases. Okay, so what I've got here is, this is competition camper grease. Now, this is sort of, it could be either a specific grease or a general grease. It's a general lubricating grease. You use it in bearings, you could use it on spindles, you could in fact use it on threads if you wanted to, but this is a performance grease. It's very, very light. It's not particularly viscous. It's full of oils. As you can see, there's loads of oil in this. It's a runny grease. This is superb for bearings. So small wheel bearings like this with very delicate balls in them, this is the stuff you want to be using. This is what I generally use for all my wheel bearing applications. So wheel bearings, wheel hubs, this is what I reach for. So it's kind of a specific grease, but it can also be used for general greasing as well. But a true general grease would be calcium grease from Morgan Blue. It is water resistant, although it's not as good as the Aquaproof, hence why it's called Aquaproof. But as a general all-round grease, this stuff is fantastic. You can use it in bearings. I particularly like to use it in heavy-duty bearings like bottom bracket bearings and headset bearings, but it can also be used to coat the outside of the bearing before you press it in or push it into a headset cup, for example. It can be used on your spindles for your cranks. It could be used on threads. It could be used pretty much for everything. And that is why I would say if you only can afford one grease from today's video, you want to start servicing your bike and you don't have the budget to buy lots and lots of different greases, get this one first, because this one will keep you going and pretty much do everything. Yeah, you can use it on wheel bearings. It's not as good as this one, but it's good enough. So this is the most general of all the general greases that I use. If you can't get hold of this, then this one is also good. Now, ignore the container because I've actually decanted this grease into here. There's not much of it left, to be honest with you, because I use quite a lot of it. This white grease here, some people will think it's lithium grease. It isn't. This is food safe grease. This is grease that they actually use in the food industry. This one, I will stick it up on the screen. This is made by AMS Oil. This is a food safe grease. So this is a general purpose grease that's used in the food industry for lubricating machines that are used in the manufacture of food. Now, why this one? This one is a general all-purpose lubricating grease. It does every job quite well. It's quite resistant to stuff. It makes things run smoothly. It's easy to apply. It's very safe to use. Very non-toxic. So non-toxic, in fact, you can actually eat it. Don't eat it. Don't eat it. But you can, hence why it's used in the food industry, and it's relatively cheap as well. So if you are struggling to find bike-specific greases where you live, look for a food grease, okay, used in the food industry. Okay, so I've got some old bearings here and some old bearing cups and stuff and some covers, and I'm going to sort of show you generally how to apply the grease or the different ways of doing it. And really, for me, there's only two ways to apply grease. And the first way of doing it is just with your fingers, obviously with a glove on. If you are changing between greases, do try to use different gloves or at least clean your hands really well before switching because you don't want to cross-contaminate. It is extremely important when using something like copper grease not to put this in any other type of grease because the copper particles in here will not go well in bearings. Neither should this. So these two do not belong in bearings, okay? But these ones and the food safe grease, absolutely, you can put that in bearings if you so wish. Right. So the first way of doing things is just with your finger. So imagine this is our headset bearing here. We're going to put this back into our headset. And to protect this bearing against the elements and water and dirt, we're going to use some Aquaproof. So we'll get the Aquaproof container. Now, generally, I don't like doing this. This is not my preferred method of greasing things, but this is the way you can do it if you don't have another method. You get a finger, make sure the finger's clean, dip your finger in the grease, and then it's always a good idea to pop the lid back on because you never know what dust and particles are flying around in the air, or something might go wrong, right? And you might drop something in here that then contaminates the rest of your grease. Take your grease and you can just smear it onto the bearing. And this is how we protect the bearing from water getting in there. So you smear it all over the seals, all over the sides, on the inside of the bearing, and basically you coat the bearing completely in that grease. Okay, and there you go. And then that would be ready once it's completely coated to go back into the bike. And that's basically the simplest and the most common way of applying grease. Some people use a paintbrush, or they have applicators that contain or have a paintbrush built into them. I've never used those personally, and mostly because I find that if you've got brushes lying around covered in grease, that's just going to be a dirt magnet and a dust magnet. And my workshop sometimes gets very dusty. I cut carbon parts, I grind things, and so I've got lots of dust floating around in the air, and I much prefer to have things sealed so that dust can't stick to them. If you've got a bunch of sticky paintbrushes lying around. You've also got to keep constantly switching between brushes every time you reapply the grease. So I'm not a fan of that idea. Personally, I don't. My preferred method for applying grease is the plastic syringe. So I'm very fortunate. I actually get these from my wife, who works in a lab. And you know, they do all sorts of experimentation in the lab. This one was used for a pig-human chimera, or possibly this was from their G7 super soldier project. I'm not really sure, but essentially, no, I'm only joking. So yeah, plastic syringes. You can pick these up all sorts of places. You know, your local chemist or pharmacy will probably have these lying around. What you want to also try and get hold of as well is the little syringe caps that go on the top. You can either cut the syringes off, or sometimes they come with plastic irrigators. I'll try and find a picture. They're like little white plastic tubes that come off the top. I tend to cut those off as well. And if I can remove this is pretty on here, to be honest with you. Oh, yeah, that's stiff. You get this. Okay, you can slide that on the top of your syringe. And if you notice, this is my calcium grease syringe. This is my Camper grease. It has become oxidized. Don't worry about that. It'll change color when it goes in the bearings anyway. This is not really affecting it terribly much. It just means that air has got to the grease there. Basically, you'll notice that one of these holes is bigger than the other. It'll become more obvious if I squeeze some grease out. So this is the size for the general normal syringe. And this is the size for the Camper grease syringe. You see the huge difference? So having these little heads is useful because you can get much finer grease application. So what I would do with these is, if I wanted to grease something, I would either use the syringe to put the grease directly onto the object, or I'd use the syringe to place some grease on my finger for then wiping onto the object. So this one, I might want to put some grease on the inside of this cup, to help with pressing the bearing in, for example. And I would just, or imagine this is a headset, or maybe this is a bearing, and you see I get a nice bead of grease around the inside of this cup with this syringe. Obviously, the faster you squeeze, the more grease you'll get. I think it's the best way of applying. Then I can use the end of the syringe to spread it out if I want to, so I can rotate it around a few times like that, and just spreads the grease out completely, or I can just use my finger like that to spread the grease afterwards. It's entirely up to me. So I really like this. It also keeps the grease clean. If there's any dust or particles in the air, it can't go onto your grease because it's sealed inside these syringes. And if I just wipe my hand fairly clean, you can see this grease on there now. If you are concerned about dirt or particles in the air and you think it might be sticking to your syringe, you can just stick the syringe in the paper like that, wipe it off, and then squeeze the syringe a little bit and get rid of the first blob of grease. That cleans the system and means that if there was any dirt or dust collecting on the aperture there, it is now gone. So there you go. That's why I like syringes for applying grease. Same with the copper grease here. Keep the syringes for that grease until the syringe either breaks or the rubber wears out. I found with all the greases I'm using here today, they don't tend to damage the rubber seals because these are bike safe greases. They're designed not to damage rubber. So I've been using these for years and they've never damaged the rubber plunger. So that's good. Some greases you buy are more harsh and they will eat away at the rubber, and eventually you'll have to throw the syringe away after a few uses. So be aware of that. If you don't buy the greases I'm showing you here today, you might come across that issue. Right, so let's pretend we are greasing this wheel bearing here. This is a ceramic bearing. Now, you don't need to use ceramic grease for ceramic bearings. A lot of people seem to think you do. That is not the case. Ceramic grease for me is a bit of a marketing ploy. It's really unnecessary. It's usually highly overpriced as well. Normal bike greases like this are more than you need. This is the calcium grease. This is what I would use in a bottom bracket. Now, when you're filling a bearing with grease, if it's something like a wheel bearing or bottom bracket bearing, you don't want to overfill it. Okay, so on many bearings on the market, especially for bicycles, you have a drive side and you have a non-drive side. So this for me would be the side that I would press into the frame. It's the side that has the back of the cage on it. This is a polymer cage. The black balls in here for the ceramic balls, you can see them on display in this side of the cage. This is the side that I would have to the outside of the bike before I put the seals back on it. This is the side that I would grease. I would take my calcium grease syringe and I would squeeze the grease into the bearing like this. There we are, till that side was filled up nicely. And you'll notice this side is clear, there's nothing in that side, okay, because you simply don't need to put grease in both sides. And then I can put my cover back on, and as I press the cover on, you can see the grease is squeezing into that cage there, and that's lubricating that bearing. That's quite a lot of grease in there. That's nearly 50% full, basically. Maybe a little bit too much for a wheel bearing, but for a bottom bracket, it's good to have a decent amount in there, and that's all you need. You definitely don't want to do both sides because that would completely pack the bearing. You do want some room in there for the grease to move around. As the grease heats up, or as you rotate it, it will sort itself out and it will sort of move around. With regards to undergreasing and overgreasing things, generally speaking, it's better to overgrease something than undergrease it. If you're going to make a mistake and you're going to overgrease it, it's better than undergreasing something. Undergreasing something will lead to way more damage normally. The only example I can really think of where overgreasing would be a serious problem would be any bike wheel, for example, that specifically says not to. There are some brands of wheel out there that are very, very sensitive to the amount of grease you put in them. Again, read the manufacturer's recommendations before you service your parts. And some of them are very finicky about the amount of grease or the type of grease that you use. But also, like on a general wheel hub where you have a pull system, where you have those little flappers held in place and they're sort of bouncing off a spring, and those are locking into the teeth of the hub as you pedal. If you overgrease a wheel hub, like if you completely fill the wheel hub with grease, those little flappers, those pulls can't move anymore, and you'll basically get slippage on the hub and it won't lock in properly when you're riding, and that could cause an accident or damage to the hub. So that's an area where obviously overgreasing would be a problem, but generally speaking, the only thing that's going to happen if you overgrease a bearing is you'll go a bit slower. You know, if you were chasing every second in a bike race, you'd probably end up lubricating all your bearings with oil for the day. Grease is, we're talking about practical bike maintenance here, everyday usage kind of bikes. And for that, you want to use a liberal helping of grease to prevent water and dirt from getting in there. So with our wheel bearing here, we've got very, very small bearings in this metal cage here. What would we use? Well, we'd use our camper grease. And I would clean off the nozzle. Make sure there's no dirt on the nozzle at all. And then we can apply grease to this wheel bearing. This is going to need even less grease than the bottom bracket. So you see these little gaps between the balls? I'd stick my nose of my syringe in there and inject a little bit of grease between those balls. Obviously, the finer your little syringe nose is, the deeper you can get down in there. Just put a few little blobs of grease in. I mean, if you're lazy, you could just put a very small worm around it, but you notice that the worm's not really going in between the balls. So it is better to stick that nose in there, press it in, give a little squeeze. Just get that grease in between those balls so that they can get well lubricated. So you see, we're not really filling the bearing at all, we're just injecting enough grease, so we're greasing those balls. And then again, you can stick the cover on. This has actually got a drive side and a non-drive side cover, and you can just see some of the grease that we've injected in there poking out the other side. We don't need to fill that gap entirely. Pop that one on, and there you go, that's our wheel bearing done. Again, as this heats up, and this wheel bearing will be traveling at much higher speed than, for example, our bottom bracket or our headset for sure. As this travels at high speed, it will get warm. It will start to melt down the grease a little bit. The grease will become more oil, and it will move its way around this bearing and make sure that everything in there is nicely lubricated. So we don't really need to worry too much. Just don't overgrease these, really. Again, if you were to overgrease it, it's not a big deal. You're not going to hurt the bearing. You're just going to go slower. Okay, so for wheel bearings, it's around 30% grease. to air. For a bottom bracket bearing, for me, it's around 40 to 50%. For a headset, 100%. I've just completely packed that with grease, in my opinion, because these are so exposed to water sitting on them and dirt. And like I say, I've never had to replace one of my own headset bearings from rust, so that is what I would recommend for that. It works for me. Okay, finally, let's show you the application of copper grease to some fine threads on a cup like this, on a bearing cup. That is where copper grease absolutely excels. And you want to grease up the first few threads, minimum. So you put a little worm around here like this, all the way around the cup. You don't have to use a lot because they are very fine threads. You can use a syringe just to smear that around a little bit, and then maybe a fatter worm somewhere here in the middle. There we go. Just retract that syringe a little bit, keep the grease inside, and then you just take your finger and you finish it off by smearing it around like that. Make sure that that's down into all those threads. You don't have to coat every single thread. There's some air gaps there, but that's not a problem, because the moment you start to turn it into the frame, those air gaps will disappear and that grease will get pushed around. So there you go, that's all you need, and that will prevent that from seizing into the frame. Okay, let's just wrap up with some do's and don'ts for our greases. Number one is don't mix your greases, don't contaminate your greases, don't leave the lids off your grease tubs and let dust and particles get in there. Do keep your grease pots in clean, cool, dry environments. Obviously don't heat your greases, don't set fire to them, don't keep them in the reach of children or animals. Keep them safe and clean and contamination free, and don't mix them together. Another thing is, obviously, keep greases away from braking components. So brake pads, whether they be for rim brake or disc brake, do not appreciate being coated in grease, especially not this one. If you want to absolutely ruin somebody's day, a little bit of this on some disc brake pads, they will never stop again. So yeah, keep it away from brake pads, keep it away from braking surfaces. Do not get grease on your fingers and then touch your brake rotors. That will ruin your day. So when you are doing any kind of brake work, and yes, there are greases used around your braking components, but not on your braking components. Like, for example, like I said, if you want to grease up that little thread on the bolt that retains your brake pads on your disc brakes, first remove your brake pads with clean hands. Put those brake pads to one side, preferably in a plastic bag, so you're not tempted to touch it while you're working, and then apply the grease just to the area where you need it, and then change your gloves or clean your hands before then retouching your brake pads, because again, you do not want any kind of grease or lubricant on your braking components. Very important. Some other do's with grease: do apply grease to any component that is going to rub against another component. Anywhere where you've got a hinge or something which is moving, grease is fantastic in those kind of areas to prevent wear. Anywhere where you're pressing something in, usually a grease is a good idea. We're also going to go now and look at my bike, and I'm going to show you all the areas where I've used grease on my bike and what kind of grease I have used. Okay, here is one of my bikes, and I'm going to go through all the areas on the bike that I can think of where I've used grease and what kind of grease I use, and you're going to see a trend appearing. So starting from the top, we have this seat or saddle clamp here. You'll notice that this has aluminium wedges, top and bottom, that are wedged into a titanium tube here. Both this section here and this section here has aquaproof grease, just preventing those from creaking when they are tightened into that clamp. The titanium bolt here has got copper grease on the threads that go into this aluminium block. So we have aquaproof on the outside and copper grease on the threads. Coming down to the seat post clamp itself, you will actually be able to see a tiny amount of copper grease just poking out from that thread there. Despite the fact this bike is pretty dirty, you can see where the water has been slapping up against the back of the frame, and this bike gets regularly washed and that copper grease is still there. That is because that copper grease really adheres very, very well to those threaded components and does not come off with general water. So that is absolutely fantastic. Moving down here, this bolt for the front derailleur, these bolt screws here for the adjustment, and this bolt here for retaining the cable all have copper grease on them, as do the bolts for the chain rings, as does the bolt for retaining the crank. The crank spindle has got calcium grease on it. The bearings inside the bottom bracket have got calcium grease in them, and the shell of the frame where I pressed in my bottom bracket has been coated in aquaproof grease before I pressed in the BB. The pedals here, the spindle threads have got copper grease on, and the bearings within this ceramic titanium pedal have got calcium grease on them. Moving to the back of the bike, let's do the brakes. These retaining bolts for the brake calipers have got copper grease on them. This little screw here for retaining the brake pad has got copper grease on it, and this screw or bolt here for the shoe has also got copper grease on it, as does this adjustment screw here that also has copper grease on. Basically anywhere there's a screw and there's a thread, I put copper grease. This cap here, which retains the cassette, has got copper grease. This titanium bolt here that holds on the jockey wheel also has copper grease, as does this barrel adjuster. The bearing itself inside the jockey wheel has got some of my bike oil on it, some of my lubricating bike oil, so they spin extra fast. This screw here for adjustment of the rear derailleur, as these two here also have copper grease, as does this bolt that holds on the derailleur to the derailleur hanger, and as do these tiny bolts here. They all have copper grease on them. The wheel hub inside, the bearings have got competition camper grease, and the pawls have been lubricated with DT Swiss special grease. Even though this is not a DT Swiss hub, I still use it for lubricating my pawls. And the end caps on the ends of the wheel hubs, it's easier to show you down here. So these end caps that are pressed on to the ends of the axles when you close up the wheel hubs after servicing, those have actually got a little bit of calcium grease smeared on them just to prevent water from going in there, protecting the much more sensitive camper grease which is in the bearings. The threads on my quick releases have got a very light smattering of copper grease. The headset here, the headset bearing itself has got calcium grease inside it. It has been completely coated top and bottom with aquaproof grease. This bolt that holds the top cap on has got copper grease on it, or it might have aquaproof, I can't remember. These bolts here, titanium bolts into an aluminium stem, these have got copper grease on them, as do these ones holding on my handlebar, as do these adjustment bolts here. They also have copper grease. Loads of copper grease going on here. The bottle cage bolts, these also have copper grease on them. These are titanium bolts in aluminium lugs that fit into the titanium frame. They've got copper grease on them. Yeah, so pretty much the most common grease I'm using is copper grease because it works on all the threaded parts of the bike, and there's a lot of threading going on here, a lot of bolts. All the fast-moving bearings have got competition camper. All the heavy-duty bearings have got calcium, and anything I needed to waterproof pretty much is either calcium or aquaproof. So there you go, folks. That is it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. Please do let me know in the comments below if you're confused by anything or if you want any more clarification. I hope this helps you when you're doing your servicing at home. And as always, folks, when you're out riding, please do stay safe. And if you'd like to support the channel, please do so via the Buy Me a Coffee page. Sorry. All right, folks. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye.
You know, when you came in, I was watching a Reginald Scott video.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the video. Yeah, I was just
I
watching.
really like Reginald.
Yeah,
it's a great guy. It's very funny. I watch all his videos. I watch all the videos of Reginald, George,